We take you to Moldova, a small but strategically pivotal country in Eastern Europe that has once again found itself at the centre of the continent's struggle over democracy, sovereignty and geopolitics. For decades, Moldova has stood at a crossroads between East and West. The country, with a population of just over 2.5 million, shares a long border with Ukraine and maintains deep cultural and linguistic ties with neighbouring Romania. Yet for many years, its political direction has swung back and forth between those advocating closer ties with Moscow and those pushing to integrate with the European Union. That tug of war reached a decisive moment in the latest parliamentary elections, a vote widely viewed as a referendum on Moldova's future course. This election did not take place in a vacuum. The war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion in 2022, and the broader contest over Europe's security have all magnified Moldova's importance. For many voters, the question on the ballot was not simply who would govern, but which path the country would choose: a deeper partnership with Brussels or a return to Moscow's sphere of influence. On election day, the streets of the capital, Chisinau, were calm but carried a sense of urgency. Voters queued outside schools and community centres converted into polling stations. Among them was a young mother, Lucia Stratton, who arrived with her 2 daughters. She told local reporters she cast her ballot in hopes of a European future, one that promised better economic opportunities and a safer environment for her children. Scenes like this played out across the country. People of all ages arrived steadily to vote. Election observers noted that the process was largely orderly, even as authorities reported scattered incidents of intimidation and attempts at vote buying. Moldovan officials had warned for weeks about what they called an unprecedented disinformation campaign originating in Russia. Social media platforms were flooded with misleading posts, fake polls, and narratives designed to cast doubt on the electoral process. Moscow denied any role, calling the accusations baseless. Despite these tensions, the vote proceeded. Ballot after ballot, Moldovans made their choice. When the counting neared completion, with 99.91% of the ballots tallied, the results were clear. The Pro-European Action and Solidarity Party, known as PAS, secured just over 50% of the vote. Their main challenger, the pro-Russian Patriotic Bloc, managed just over 24%. For President Maya Sandu and her allies in PAS, it was a moment of vindication. Sandu, in office since 2020, has made the fight against corruption and the drive toward EU integration the cornerstones of her leadership. Her party first gained power in 2021, but has often faced fierce resistance from pro-Moscow political forces and disinformation networks. The day after the election, the headquarters of PAS were filled with supporters, party officials, and journalists. Cameras captured the arrival of party leader Igor Grosu, a close ally of Sandu, who addressed the crowd and the press. "This is a victory for Moldova's European future," Grosu declared. "We are moving forward with our reforms and we will not turn back." His words resonated beyond Moldova's borders. Leaders across Europe congratulated the country for what they described as a democratic choice in the face of pressure and intimidation. The president of neighbouring Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, called the result a victory for the whole of Europe. EU leaders in Brussels welcomed the outcome as a positive step for regional stability. European election observers, while praising the overall conduct of the vote, cautioned that Moldova would need to continue strengthening its democratic institutions. They highlighted the threats of hybrid interference, including cyber attacks and coordinated online propaganda, that remain a challenge for the country. For ordinary Moldovans, the vote carried both hope and uncertainty. Many believe that aligning with the European Union offers the best path to prosperity and security. EU membership promises access to a far larger market, more robust rule of law, and closer integration with European security structures. Yet, Moldova remains one of Europe's poorest nations, and citizens expect tangible improvements in jobs, infrastructure, and living standards. Economists point out that European integration requires deep reforms, especially in the judiciary and the fight against entrenched corruption, and that progress will take time. The election result, they say, gives PAS a strong mandate to push forward, but it also raises expectations among the public. The political shift also carries implications for one of Moldova's most sensitive issues, the breakaway region of Transnistria. This narrow strip of land along the border with Ukraine has been under the control of pro-Russian authorities since a brief war in the early 1990s. Several thousand Russian troops remain stationed there, despite Moldova's calls for their withdrawal. For decades, Transnistria has served as a lever of influence for Moscow. Analysts warn that as Chisinau moves closer to Brussels, the risk of renewed tensions in or around the region could grow. Moscow, for its part, reacted sharply to the election outcome. Russian officials accused the West of meddling in Moldova's internal affairs and warned that closer ties with the EU could further destabilize the region. But Moldovan leaders argue that their citizens have made a clear choice. They insist that strengthening democratic institutions and pursuing EU membership is the surest way to ensure peace and stability. The European Commission has already opened preliminary talks with Moldova about the next steps toward integration. These include reforms in the judiciary, public administration, and energy independence. The EU has also increased financial support for Moldova, aiming to help it withstand economic pressure and resist external interference. Public sentiment in Moldova remains divided, though recent surveys show a growing majority favouring closer ties with the EU, a trend that accelerated after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Many Moldovans see their country's future as bound up with Europe's security and prosperity, especially as neighbouring Ukraine fights to defend its sovereignty. At the same time, significant segments of the population, particularly older generations and residents in rural areas, continue to feel an affinity for Russia, whether due to historical ties, cultural links, or economic reasons. Bridging these divides will be a key task for the PAS government as it moves forward. International analysts emphasize that Moldova's story reflects a broader pattern in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet space. Countries such as Georgia and Armenia have also faced choices about their geopolitical orientation, often under intense pressure from larger neighbours and global powers. The outcome in Moldova is therefore seen as part of a larger struggle over the post-Cold War order in Europe. For the European Union, Moldova's democratic choice is a signal that the bloc's appeal endures, even in the face of disinformation, economic hardship and security threats. For Moscow, however, it represents another loss of influence in a region long considered part of its historical sphere.